What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JAR. JAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. It's our weekly show where we go over the magic stories as they're posted on Wizard's website. This week, we are still here with the Ixalan stories, and we are here for the talented Captain Vraska, once again, yes, by the R&D narrative team. My quick review at the beginning. For the last 2 weeks, we've been, I think, pretty critical. Not unfounded, but we've been pretty critical of the stories. I think this week was a welcome improvement. I really, really enjoyed this one, so I highly recommend it. I don't know.
Yeah, me too.
So that's the quick review. We always like to try to give you guys that because we don't review. Sorry, I do that more often than I'd like. We review. We don't summarize. Again, otherwise the whole show is moot if we don't review. That's why we're here. But we like to review. We like to have discussions, but we don't summarize the story for you. And so that we're not spoiling it for you, and so that you're seeing it in its original form, we recommend that you go check the story out first and then come back here. That being said,
then the show's just called Joe and Amy.
Yeah, Ja. So for moving on to the full review itself, this was clearly a Vraska story. One from the headdress, two from the title, but we went from Jace to Watley to Vraska. So we're sticking with Planeswalkers, and we see more of Jace this time as well. We see Nicol Bolas as well this time.
Yes.
Which was awesome. We got a little bit more of backstory or information as to why there's some flavor text on the rares, on at least one of the rares or mythics, that talks about the map or the compass that Vraska has that was given to her by Nicol Bolas. And when we first read that, we were like, why is Vraska working for Nicol Bolas? That seems odd. And we find out today that it's a tentative relationship. She doesn't fully understand why she's doing what she's doing, but she knows that by doing it, she's being given an opportunity that she really wants in being promised to be the leader of the Golgari, taking over for Gerard. Now, on good old Ravnica. Now, we've seen, and if you watched the story that we reviewed on it, it references back to that story. This story references back to the story that we read previously about the Crawl, which I believe was the story that tied into the Commander anthology when that was released. And one of the commanders was a member of the Crawl, which is an insect people who are kind of looked down on by the Golgari Swarm and Gerard and all those people that follow him. And the story was great. I remember it vividly and fondly.
I don't.
I had to remind her. About the story. But it was good. We got to hear a little bit about Vraska in that story. And then now in this one, we get a callback to it where she's thinking about those people and kind of, again, calling our attention back to that story where it also kind of, broadly and in a meta sense, helps us to realize that, hey, some of these, fringe stories that get posted, they don't mean nothing, right? They can come back. They do matter.
Gee, didn't I say something like that?
You may have. And the nice
that
thing...
you didn't agree with.
And it depends. With that one, I thought and hoped that it would, but for other ones, I agree with you. I did not agree with you. But that one I knew, or at least I felt that when we went back to Ravnica, that story and the decisions and occurrences within it would kind of have an impact on at least the Golgari Swarm, if not kind of everything and how the power struggle between the guilds would actually go. Enough of that. That was the beginning of this story where we got into that, and it's nice to, like I said, to get that callback in there. Then we move on to what I had predicted would occur, and that's not me patting myself on the back, I'm just stating a fact, that I predicted that we would see a story that would make us like Vraska. It would make us see her as not an automatic villain like she was on Ravnica. There are reasons and motivations behind why people do the things that they do, and we found out a lot, if not all of it, for Vraska here today in this story.
Definitely not all of it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm sure there's more to it.
But yeah,
but
now
I didn't.
now we have her motivation for working for Nicol Bolas in the first place. But then we can kind of see where that takes her in terms of her own sort of moral compass.
Well, we also see her, I'm talking even more broadly, we see her motivations for killing, for why she would kill and how, and being an assassin and what that meant for her, and the fact that she has a code when she kills and when she takes up contracts, etc. And we got to see a lot of her personality, we got to see more to it, and the fact that she's not just a cold-blooded killer. She does, as Nicol Bolas points out to her, want to lead, and we get to see that as well, that she wants to be a leader of these people, and she wants to be a leader of the Golgari, but then when she gets to Ixalan, she becomes a leader of this pirate group, the Brazen Coalition.
Hey, practice is a great way to get to where you want to be.
It's true. It's very true. Now, there was discussion going around online with us and in general of people asking how Vraska had found Jace in the story 2 weeks ago. Now, there are two things here, right? Vraska, in this story, when she finds Jace, says, "How did he find me?" Right? Because one of her men calls out that he's overboard, and she finally sees him and realizes who it is, and then she's like, "I'm going to kill him," and then decides to wait, and when she decides to wait, realizes he doesn't know who he is, blah, 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 etc. But it's also possible, since they were following the path of that compass, which had multiple hands on it pointing in multiple different directions.
And changing.
Correct. And the fact that Ral Zarek, who we now know is working for Nicol Bolas, and who is on Ravnica, knows of the confrontations that Vraska and Jace have had with one another. I wouldn't be surprised if that compass was in some way pointing her towards Jace. So that, in the hopes that, she would see him lash out and kill him when he was at his weakest, when Nicol Bolas had thrown him there, and it would be, Vraska would kind of be used as a pawn for Bolas without her even realizing it, because Bolas didn't say, "You're going to see Bellerin there." He just sent her there to look for the immortal sun, seemingly, because he sent her to go to the Golden City and get the item that is there, which presumably is the immortal sun. That's what everybody else is looking for. But it very well could have been that this compass was pointing her in that direction, and so because they were headed in that, towards that bearing, that may have been how Jace was found. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but that's an option. That's an idea, and I wouldn't put it past Bolas for a second to attempt to use an unwitting pawn. I mean, come on, that sounds exactly like Bolas to me.
Yeah.
So that's just a thought. I don't know if you agree, disagree. I think that makes sense.
Maybe.
All right. Well, I mean, obviously, presumably we will see. I don't want to say obviously. Presumably we will see.
Maybe it's pointing at the other planeswalkers on the plane.
Yeah, in general, yeah. So we'll see Watley and Angrath and etc. And if any other planeswalkers get there.
Because she wasn't a planeswalker yet when Vraska acquired the tool.
Yes and no. I would only say that because we don't know at what point in the timeline last week's story was set, technically. Because no one who we have seen was in that story.
Yeah, I guess that's
so that could have been said a long time ago, it could have not.
Right.
Speaking of timelines, I really appreciated in this story, one of the many things that I really appreciated was the fact that they gave us somewhat definitive timestamps for where we were, where the planeswalkers were, and how long they'd been on Ixalan. Jace, when he was showing his experiences through illusion to Vraska, the story told us, through Vraska, that he was depicting 40 days, which means he had been on Ixalan for 40 days. Vraska mentioned, or in her own head, or through telling us, that she spent months gathering this crew together. So she's been here for months, Jace has been here for 40 days. So it gives you a general idea of timeline, which I always appreciate because there have been times in the past on this show and just with the stories in general where the timeline has gotten a little muddy and it just didn't make any damn sense.
Right.
kind of following along, and I didn't mean to do this on purpose, I just said damn. For those of you who are watching, hopefully you are of an age where those types of words, we're not using them every third word or every third sentence. We try to keep it relatively comfortable here, and some people are uncomfortable with profanity, but it is somewhat within our vernacular. We are adults, and we sometimes use that language, and whether it slips out or whether we purposefully use it is neither here nor there. But I appreciated, as an adult, reading this story with what happened to be very often adult themes in these stories. I appreciated reading some casual, stronger language being used, like damn and asshole. I don't think that it was them trying to be edgy, whereas, if it were being used a lot, I think that would kind of be the case. But I think we're seeing a lot now, at least with superhero movies, and I usually rep superhero t-shirts and stuff on this show, but with superhero movies recently, I think we've been finding more and more that the edgier a story is, the more accepted it is becoming. Between Batman and Wolverine and Deadpool, like, these kinds of franchises are becoming more and more leaning in that direction of, be willing to be edgy, be willing to be loud and boisterous and obnoxious and whatever. And I'm not saying that I want, Wizards of the Coast or Magic the Gathering to go full force into Jace dropping F-bombs everywhere and, giddy and whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But I appreciate at least a little bit, because especially where Vraska made a point of saying that people on this plane, pirates especially, are profane. And it would make sense. They curse like sailors, right, is a phrase that you hear. And so, for the spirit of the plane itself, I thought it was appropriate.
Yeah.
I don't know if you think so as well.
Yeah, I don't know if all that extra explanation was needed, but yes.
All right. Well, maybe I went too in depth, or maybe I just was way off base. But regardless,
You were on base. There was just way too much base.
Fair enough. I appreciated the use of profanity with the pirate-themed set. I also liked, towards the middle of the story, there were some genuinely funny comedic moments. Like, we had to stop and just enjoy laughing at these comedic moments. The one I can think of offhand is, when Vraska first meets Jace and he's like not really making much sense, and she's trying to figure out what's going on with him. And at one point, he's asking questions, and at one point she just thinks to herself, "This is hell. I'm in hell right now."
Right.
That's hilarious. That's really funny. And we have said in the past that there have been times in these stories where they've gone for humor and just struck out. Completely struck out. And yet you could tell that it was an attempt at humor and it just didn't land.
Yeah.
This was an instance, and that was not the only example. That's just the example that I wrote down. But there were a couple of really good lines in there. And something that, again, for what turned out towards the end to be a pretty serious story, right? There was some heavier topics that we'll get into in a minute, plus the fighting with the Dusk Legion. But you also had these genuine moments of joy and laughter and comedy, and it's a little bit of a relief, right? You can read the story, you can laugh, and then you can kind of sigh and move on. I thought that was a nice little touch there as well. Also, talking about something that's kind of funny but also clever as hell, Lord Nicholas.
Yeah.
That is who Vraska is describing to her crew as her patron.
Right.
Who gave her the compass, who told her where the Golden City was, basically, and who told her that that's where she has to go to get what she wants. And she's calling him Lord Nicholas. No H, Nicol, Nicol, A-S. Nicholas. Hilarious and brilliant. I love that. I think it's super clever, but I also think it's just funny.
Well, I think it's just, what she thought of at the moment when people were like, hey, let's start asking questions and figure out what it is we're doing right now.
Yes.
And they started asking questions, and then she had to pull something out her ass.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. Speaking of Lord Nicholas, when he met with Vraska at first, I wrote this down, I forgot to mention it earlier, he said to her, you will, I want to make sure, okay. You won't be able to return until your task is complete. Now, we have seen the first story spotlight card already with Ixalan's binding, where Jace tries to planeswalk away and he can't. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week, when Watley tried to planeswalk, which she didn't really know what she was doing, but she saw Kaladesh, the Golden City, and then realized she couldn't leave. Angrath saw that she couldn't leave, saw the pentagram or whatever above her body, realized that she was also a planeswalker and that she couldn't leave. It very well could be that Bolas binded Ixalan, knowing that Vraska was going there, and that until she uses the spell that Bolas gave her access to kind of pierce the veil between planes and communicate to whomever, presumably it will be Tezzeret or Ralzeric. I'm thinking Ralzeric, but it could be neither. But the spell that Nicol Bolas gave to Vraska, once she uses that...
And her little invitation.
Right. Presumably, that will get the binding off of that plane, which also is a nice kind of cap to the story, because otherwise if it's just an old magic that's been on the plane, then how are they going to get rid of it to be able to leave? It makes more sense that Bolas would do it and he would remove it once the job's been done.
Yeah.
So, but it could also still not be, that could still not be the case. Who knows? That's just our thoughts, at least, I'm sorry, my thought on it. You seemed to agree.
Yeah.
Okay. What?
Well, I thought you said the first story spotlight was the actual binding.
That's what I'm saying. The first story spotlight was the binding of Ixalan, but the card is the one that shows Jace kind of on all fours, not being able to leave.
Okay, yeah,
and
so
this,
it doesn't actually tell us anything.
Right. And the second story spotlight we got today in Vraska's Contempt, because it showed her turning this vampire, this awesome vampire conquistador, to stone. I really liked the way that they used the vampire conquistadors, because they talked about the fact that they're not really pirates, right? Like, they're coming to get back the immortal sun that was stolen from them, but they do pirate-like things in boarding ships and plundering, but they don't plunder to steal things like Vraska and her pirates ended up doing. They plunder to take blood.
Well, I mean, that's what they would need to steal. They need to survive.
Correct. I just think, well, I mean, that's more like, raping their women or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's that concept of, I'm not comparing blood drinking to rape. Don't think that way. I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to find the parallel between typical pirate behavior and what these vampires are doing. You seem to be offended. Please.
No, I'm just...
Oh, okay.
I don't see how it's similar to that. The pirates would steal food from another ship if it's fresher than the food that they have.
Correct.
Even if it's not.
But as well as
food and
riches and treasure, if that were to be had as well.
Okay, but these guys don't care about riches and treasure.
Correct.
They care about eating.
Correct.
And finding the one treasure that matters to them.
Correct. What was originally theirs, at least in their own mind. So, yeah, no, I agree. I guess I was just looking for that parallel, and that's a good point, is that, taking food, fresher food, whatever, yeah, that definitely would make more sense. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit of a rougher topic, and so I wanted to save it for the end, but I wanted you to be able to talk about if you had anything that you wanted to say before that. Just about the story in general, something that I might have missed or...
No, I think I'm good.
All right. I wanted to preface it because I want to touch on a topic that was touched on pretty heavily in this story, and that's the topic of abuse. And I'm aware that for some people that may be a difficult topic to hear about and to discuss, and so I wanted this to be the moment where if that is something that's troubling for you, then I want to say thank you for joining us this week. There's really not much more that we're going to be talking about past that. And so, thank you, and we will see you next week. Please subscribe, do all that fun stuff. We'll talk about that more at the end. But I want to talk about it, and I don't want people who feel uncomfortable to kind of feel like it's coming out of nowhere and they're trapped by it. So, once again, thank you all if you are leaving at this moment. If not, I think that this story did an amazing job of focusing on somebody who very clearly has been physically, emotionally, possibly sexually, verbally abused. I mean, this is it's very clearly shown when Jace just casually pats Vraska on the back and she screams, "Don't." And the entirety of the crew, or not the entirety of the crew, excuse me, but the quartermaster steps forward and says, nobody touches the captain, and Vraska's like, no, it's okay, he didn't know. So but at the same time, you can tell she's very frazzled by the whole situation to begin with, and she's like a little bit embarrassed, but also not embarrassed, like she's just nervous now that she had that kind of outburst. And Jace, who has been reduced to his basest form, is just truly sorry for having upset her in this way, because of course by patting her on the back, it's true, he didn't know.
By it.
Right.
He has no idea what it's about, and
But we get a little bit of that insight because she tells us that she hasn't touched, had physical contact with anyone in years, which in and of itself, I don't pretend to understand the life of a Gorgon, but to me, that is surprising, and not because in her situation she should. That's not what I'm saying. I just think that as a being living, she, I guess, as an assassin, spends most of her time in the shadows and solitarily. So I guess it makes sense for her. I guess as a human being on Earth, it's hard for me to grasp that concept of staying away from people for years and having no physical contact whatsoever. Again, even just a pat on the back or on the shoulder or something. And it makes perfect sense. It just, was something that was a little bit more surprising.
I disagree. I don't think it makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I think it hurts her well-being and her health.
Well, I agree with that. I just think it makes sense that she would choose to do that. Makes sense to her.
In the beginning, yeah. But have it be that severe?
Yeah.
That's a bad thing for her.
Agreed.
I think if they're focusing on it that much in the story, that maybe we'll get to see her reach a point where she's mentally healthy enough, or she's recovered from that enough, where we can kind of see that not be the case and have it be fine at that point. And I think that would be a great thing to see. So I'm hoping that that's where they'll take it, but
Well,
I don't know.
You saw the 5th story spotlight card. And in the image on that 5th card where Jace is falling, if you have not seen it yet, I believe it's called Dangerous Voyage? Perilous Voyage? Perilous Voyage. Something like that. I know what it is. You guys can look it up yourselves. Just type in Ixalan Story Spotlight or look through the spoilers if you haven't seen it already. But it is Jace falling off of a waterfall cliff. And what's Vraska doing at the top? She's reaching for him. Now he's way down. So who knows what led to that moment, but she's trying to grab him. So does that mean that she was holding him and then he fell? Or he fell and she reached out for him kind of instinctually and not really thinking, and so that doesn't really indicate an improvement? It's just instinct of,
Well,
oh, you're falling, and
her
so you reach
reaching
out.
Her reaching out to grab someone who is falling is completely different than her being willing to be touched by someone else when she's not expecting it.
That's why I'm saying, oh, okay. When she's not expecting it, that's a different story. That's fair. I'm just referring to the fact that, you know, it very well could have been instinctual and reactionary of, oh, and reaching her hand out, or it could be, you know, he's falling and she's, like the card says, she's trying to prevent death. She's trying to save him. I don't know. Usually, I feel like I reference the 5th story spotlight card a lot in these because we know that it's a moment that is coming, and so it's a moment that we can kind of analyze all the way to it. And whether that means that any or all of my thoughts or anybody else's thoughts actually come into play by the time we get to that story for that 5th story spotlight, I have no idea. I just know that it's there. It's a thing that we have to look forward to find out about. But overall, for the review portion and not the prediction portion, I liked how the story touched on the abuse. I thought it was done in a very classy way. I thought it was done in a somber way. It made you stop and think about it and realize, wow, that's something that happened to her. And again, you want a reason for this character. You need a reason beyond what they gave you in this story, which was plenty, for this character to be someone that you like. She's been through quite a bit, and to still see her be able to take control of her crew the way she did, and etc. I like that a lot. I thought that this story was amazing for Vraska in general. The relationship between Vraska and Jace was also interesting and permeated throughout a lot of the story, but this was Vraska's story. Hopefully it's not the only one from her perspective that we see in this set or this block, but if it is, again, I hope it's not, but if it is, this was a damn good one.
Yeah.
So,
like you said, I would love to see her sort of status of her just emotional pain just improve. That's what I would like to see from her. But it is great to see that she was still able to do so many amazing things kind of with her life, or you know, as a character, despite all of that, despite how much that one thing still affects her in such a real way.
right.
And yeah, and still be able to keep the story fun and light and interesting, and yeah, there's somber moments and there's fun moments, and I think overall it really encompassed kind of the entirety of what like a decent cross section of someone's small section of their life and time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I totally agree. And again, that's why I really liked this story. If I had to find a thing, and I apologize to undercut your kind of closing statement
okay.
there, if I had to find one thing to fault about this story, towards the end, and Amy and I noted this purposefully, towards the end of the story, there were about 3 instances of just a complete missing of words.
Yeah,
in
like
a sentence.
Bad typos to
Yeah.
the point of like, okay, you're missing a word here, you're missing 2 words here, you're missing a phrase here or something.
It was like little identifying words like of or an or a, but so obvious, you know, like I didn't write down an example. I apologize,
like the
but
first one. The second one was worse, and the third one was worse than that.
right. And again, we talked about this last week. It was at the end of the story or near the end of the story. if you are going to, first of all, I would genuinely hope that as the R&D narrative team, because I have written many things in my life. I don't know about you, I don't know about you all watching. I've written many things in my life, and one thing that I make a point to do if I'm writing something important, I mean, even if I'm not, I will either ask someone else to proofread it for me, or once I've finished writing, I will step away from that thing that I've written for a day or two to get it out of my head, because if I've been writing it for a long time, it's just in my mind, and so I have almost memorized what it says, and so if I'm reading through it, I'm not actually reading it, I'm just telling myself what it says, and so it's a little bit more difficult to proofread something that way. But if I step away for a day or two, put it entirely out of my head, and then come back to it, it's a lot more fresh that way. Or you have somebody else proofread it for you, because I didn't read this story more than once. I didn't read those sentences more than once. I just blatantly got to that moment 3 different times and went, wait, what does this say? Because it was just missing things.
Yeah.
There were just things missing. It was not a typo, right? It was not something that a word processor would have picked up and, highlighted so that spell check would catch it. That's not a thing. But it was missing identifying language that, honestly, all that it really does, offhand, is it takes us out of the story.
Yeah.
Because we are entrenched in it. And this was a really good one.
Yeah.
We are entrenched in the story, we're entrenched in the characters, and we're entrenched in their motivations and in their backstories, whatever you want to call it, their characterization. And then you miss a word. And it's like, wow, that sucked. All right, screw it. That's fine, let's get back into the story. And then 2 sentences later, you do it again. And then again in that same paragraph. So it's like, now I'm just completely out of it, because now I've made a point, and we did this. I've made a point now to stop and mention the fact that there have now been 3 of these in a very short period of time towards the end of what, granted, would be a pretty long story. And at the end of this long story, we had these mistakes that were unfortunate, right? And I'm not bashing the story writing team. I'm saying that it's a shame.
Yeah.
Because they did an amazing job. And over the last 2 weeks, which the stories were not bad, but they weren't as good as this one, there was still a fault in this one. And it was something as easily fixable as missing simple words.
Edit it.
Yes. And it's just a shame. It's not, again, it's not me saying these guys suck, because that's never what I'm saying, ever. I have nothing but respect for all of these writers and all of the amazing work that they do, because it gives us entertainment every week.
And that's the only reason why we sit here and review these stories, is because we care about reading them, and we care about analyzing them and talking about them. So,
they're worth it.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like I said, please don't misunderstand. I am in no way trying to bash these writers. I'm just saying that I, as the reader, would appreciate it so much more if those little things weren't in there, because that story in and of itself is great. I was going to say perfect, and that's not true. I don't want to call something perfect. I'm sure that, there are many other people who could analyze it much better than I could, but those things take away from the greatness that was what this story was, and that's a shame.
Well, it takes away from the greatness, but I think what more your point is that it takes away from the experience.
Yes, of sitting and being immersed in this world, because I then have to step out of it and go, do you see this? Look at what just happened here. So, yes.
And then we have to read it again and fill in the gaps ourselves.
Long story short, I loved this story. It was a shame that those things were in there. It touched on some serious topics, but lightheartedly, as Amy pointed out as well. Sorry, not lightheartedly. That's not fair. They touched on those serious topics seriously, but melded the story with some lighthearted points as well to balance it, and did a good job of doing that. Sorry. And overall, I really enjoyed this one much, much better than the last 2.
Definitely.
That we've read so far.
Definitely.
Guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. If you've stuck through this far, if, you know, people that left earlier, I don't blame them at all, because as I said, that's kind of a heavier discussion, and like I said, I thank you for sticking it out. This has been another episode of JAR. This weekend is the pre-release, again, at the time that we're filming this. So if you're new to our channel and you don't know, we cover the pre-release pretty extensively. We go to the store, we get our kits at midnight, we open them up. For all of you on camera, we put them up as soon as we can. Takes a little bit to edit and do all that good stuff, but we try to get it out there for all of you as soon as we can. We also film at the pre-release. We watch people opening their own stuff. So you guys should definitely check that out. You can subscribe when that button comes up. You can click on it and you subscribe to the channel. You'll find out when all of our videos come out. There are going to be other playlists popping up. You can continue watching the rest of this show if you've missed it. You can watch some openings that we've done or things like that. This has been another episode of JAR.
Yes.
Like I said, once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for including your opinions in the comment section down below. Sorry, I know my hand movements kind of clue you in. Thank you for including your opinions and joining in the discussion in the comments down below, which is an example of you showing off your...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
Thanks, Vraska. This has been another episode of JAR. I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.